Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm so glad that you guys are here. I don't know if you know this, but I don't know if I could have ever achieved my dreams and my ambitions if I didn't have people who I could help connect to the truth, help people find a path, help people understand, this codependency, this malignant codependency problem, this problem that I call self-love deficit disorder. I'm inspired. Every day I sometimes wonder, how did this happen? 31 years ago, I started my very first psychotherapy job in Boone, Iowa, of all places. I graduated Boston University and ended up in Boone, Iowa, and I loved it there. And that's where I got to do what I always dreamed about, was to listen to people who had problems, try to help them, and try to find a way to help them overcome whatever obstacles were harming them. And something very odd and peculiar happened my first year on the job. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. I can see her face, and I'm going to call her Kate. I was working with Kate, and Kate was in this really seriously bad codependent narcissist relationship. This was so before my human magnet syndrome idea. In fact, I hadn't even been married before this happened. I was single, and I was still trying to figure out who I was, what I wanted to do as a psychotherapist. And here comes this woman who's in this abusive relationship. And I'm just kind of trying to listen and do what I'm trained to do in my, my psychotherapy school, in my master's program. And we're talking, and I started to ask her about her childhood. And she started talking about it. And I started to ask her more and more details about what happened and how she experienced it. And the level of sadness, the level of loneliness, and the level of shame that she shared with me was just very difficult for a young psychotherapist to understand. But this is what I wanted to do for a living, and I was all in. And I remembered asking her, so tell me, how are you feeling deep inside? What is the emotions that you feel when you talk about your childhood trauma? And she had a very interesting look in her face. And it was a look that told me something was happening. It was a look that told me that I was talking to someone other than her. I was talking to the child that she used to be. See, very few people know this. When I was 14 years old, I taught myself how to hypnotize people. I picked up a book, and I, just thought if I read it and I studied it, I would be able to do it. And lo and behold, I became this hypnotist by age 14. And did I really know what I was doing? Probably not, but I was hypnotizing people. And I did it off and on for about 4 years, and then somewhere around age 18 or 19, I kind of gave up on it. But from that experience, before I went to college, actually it was before I was in the Army, but before I was in college, before I was in grad school, I understood that everyone has an unconscious, or a subconscious, as some therapists call it. And in that subconscious are memories that are put away. Some memories are put away for a reason, because they were too painful, and some memories are put away because we just forgot them. And it was through that early experience as a junior hypnotist, I got a taste of that other side of our personality. So back to my story with Kate. So as she was telling me about her childhood and her father and her mother, I started to make this connection. And the connection was how she was treated with her abusive narcissistic husband, and how she was treated by her abusive narcissistic father and mother. And so, as I was saying, I was asking her a lot of questions, and I asked her how she was feeling, and back to where I kind of left off and circled around and told you about my early hypnotism career, I should say. I saw a look in her eye. It was like something shifted. And I intuitively knew to ask, how are you feeling? I'm actually getting goosebumps right now telling this story because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. You know, they don't teach you this in graduate school. And she said, you know, I'm feeling really sad right now. And again, my intuition clicked in, and I said, are you feeling sad as the adult, or are you feeling sad because you're remembering something as a child? See, that's the connection to my hypnotism experience as a younger person. And she says, well, as a child. So again, all this kind of happened spontaneously. No training whatsoever. And I said, so when you're telling me about your sadness, who am I talking to? And she said, you're talking to my little child inside of me. And I asked, so what is her name? And she said it was Katie. And I knew I was onto something, because as I was having her express these deep feelings that were coming from this other place, her facial muscles changed, her eyes became red and teary, and she started to tremble, and even her voice changed a little bit. And I asked her about what she was experiencing and what she was feeling. And it was in that moment, I'll give you an exact year, 1988. I was 27. I was connecting to a dissociated part of Kate. See, I made up the name, so I can't even remember it. So if I change it, you know it's the same person. But I was connecting to a dissociated part of Kate, the trauma that she experienced as a child, what I call attachment trauma. I was connecting to the part of her that was blocked off from her consciousness. In the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic field, we call this repression. We now call, in the trauma field, we call dissociation. But what we know now is that memories that are too hard to remember, that are too painful to remember, the brain makes a decision. The brain decides, we're going to lock these memories up. We're going to put them in a hermetically sealed vault of sorts and store them in another part of the brain, because the memories are just too awful to remember. And with Kate, I stumbled upon those. And just by a stroke of luck, intuition, I got her to share little Katie's memory of some childhood abuse and neglect stories. It was very frightening for me. Now, of course, I didn't tell her that, but it was. Because I wasn't trained to do this, but I acted like I knew what I was doing, and I, again, intuitively figured out I'm talking to her child. I somehow have connected to another part of her mind. And little Katie told me about her sadness. And I'll tell you something, guys. I didn't cry. I'm sure I was overwhelmed to some degree by some emotion, but it was so difficult because I wasn't talking to an adult. I was talking to a child who remembered with pristine, crystal clear memories of what happened to her with her narcissistic father, codependent mother, and the sad, lonely, shame-filled memories of her childhood. All the dust, all the cobwebs that surrounded these memories were, in just one fell swoop, were pushed aside, and I was talking to the little girl. So I did what any good psychotherapist would do when you talk to a little child who's telling you about trauma. And I don't even think you need to go to graduate school for that. I just think it's, if you're just a good parent or a good person, you just get down on their level, psychological level, and you listen with empathy and sympathy and care. And she told me the horrific tale of her childhood. And then there was a point when I decided it was time to bring her back into her adult self. Now, going back to the hypnosis connection, my experiences and self-teaching, in my teen years of hypnosis, taught me, or I intuitively knew, I needed to bring her back, like I would bring back someone from hypnosis, back from childhood to an older age to the current age. And that's what I did. And that is when I asked Kate, what was her experience? Because I was kind of operating, blind a little bit. I was kind of doing this and just hoping it would work out. And she said she was really depressed and sad, and she just started to cry. And now at that moment, I was talking to her as an adult. And she said, she told me, I can't believe that happened to me as a child. And she was now telling me more information about what happened to her as a child, but now from the psychological perspective as the adult. It is like we opened up this Pandora's box. We opened up that vault of those hidden trauma memories, and we talked about them. And from there, I kind of closed up the session, and I thought, oh my God, WTF, what's going on? I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And a week later, when I saw her for her next session, she looked really down. And I asked her, what was going on? And she said she thought of killing herself the whole time that she was away from me, the whole week between the session. And holy shit, that freaked me out, if I may use professional terminology. And that's when I realized, that this is really, big stuff here. I'm playing with fire here. I need to know what's going on. And so we talked about it and we processed it. And what I would later figure out, I unlocked repressed, disassociated memories of her attachment trauma with her that were very, very, very painful, traumatic memories of her parents hurting her. And now they were free to be talked about, processed, and integrated in her conscious mind. And we talked for months about her childhood. And I did not go back to that little child again because I was actually kind of scared. So it was at that point I realized I need to figure out what just happened. In 1988 and 89, there wasn't any of the books out there and the research out there that we have now about trauma, the inner child, all of this stuff that has been, that there is so many books and great research on. And I found this book by David Grove. So long story short, I had an explanation for what I was doing. That is when I started to understand through a certain type of method, I can connect a person's codependency, emotional problems, relational problems, bring them back to the origin of that problem. And then get them to talk about that problem in the shape as a child who experienced it. And I started to use that technique little by little. I did not use it a lot. I knew it was too powerful to mess around with. So fast forward This is when I just got out of graduate school about a year later. I am divorced, married to someone who I thought had borderline personality disorder. Of course, I cannot legally say that she had that, but I thought it. And then divorced, and then 2 years later, after swearing I would never ever be in a relationship with someone who hurt me again, I married someone that I believe had narcissistic personality disorder. 3 years after that, I got divorced, and I was in the deepest state of depression. And you guys know this story. I've said this story over and over again in so many interviews. That's when I made a commitment to myself to get to the core of my problem, my codependency. And from that whole experience, the human magnet syndrome information was born. And that is when I started to not only understand that the problem, it was not just me falling in love with this hurtful person. And I just had to stay away from hurtful people. It was me. And because of those early experiences with clients like Kate, I was able to put together that this codependency thing is related to what happened to me as a child, some of which I forgot, and because of my own psychotherapy, with great psychotherapists, I was able to remember. So fast forward, because this is not supposed to be a big history lesson, one step led to another step, and I started to put together what would become my human magnet syndrome work, did the training, did the book, built the theory more and more. All along when I was doing my human magnet syndrome work, people kept saying, so when are you going to tell us how you solve it? And I was thinking, well, I need to tell you what it's all about first. There will be a time when I will start telling you what I do to solve it. I knew that I had to do this one step at a time. And after the book was published in 2013, I started to put together my techniques on how I get people to solve, resolve, or heal from codependency. Now, to be completely transparent, what I did 6 years ago is a little bit different from what I do now. And I promise you, what I do 6 years from now will be a little bit different, because I keep putting it together. I keep narrowing it down. I keep perfecting and learning about the human magnet syndrome, attachment trauma, codependency, self-love deficit disorder. You guys know all of this. And that's when I started to put together what would become my Codependency Cure work. And that's going to be a book I'm going to write probably in about 6 months to a year. You guys got to hang in there. But until then, all that information is in my full-length seminar videos. And I have 11 or 12 of those at my Self-Love Recovery Institute company, or with selfloverecovery.com. I have full-length videos, training videos, that were made for therapists and the general audience alike. The YouTube videos, which I am committed to do and I'm never going to stop, are bits and pieces. But the whole package of the Codependency Cure, that's in a 6-hour video. The whole package of the human magnet syndrome, that's in a 6-hour video. I got the book. I have videos on attachment trauma. I have videos on this and that. So if you're interested on getting the meat and the extra details on the information, check it out. The Codependency Cure material that you guys know really well by now, self-love deficit disorder, self-love abundance, the self-love deficit disorder pyramid, the self-love abundance pyramid, my 10 steps in my self-love recovery psychotherapy method, and my healing the trauma child psychotherapy trauma resolution method. All of that stuff is being written down bit by bit. So it occurred to me about a year and a half ago I want to put together an event that was something like an event that I went to 12 years ago that changed my life. I was involved in this men's organization called Victories of the Heart. And it was really good. It had changed my life. And I wouldn't be here talking to you if I was not involved in that event. But they had this, they started off with this weekend, they called it a breakthrough weekend. And through their own approach, they were able to bring the men that went there, each man individually, to the memory of being a child and what got them stuck. And I remember not only experiencing that and having this flood and flash of memories, and then through the rest of the weekend and having the growth and the healing really take root, I thought to myself, I could do the same thing. Of course, using my own techniques, my own theoretical material, because none of what I do is similar to what Victories does, other than I tap into through a set of techniques and procedures, the wounded child, or what I call the trauma child. And I thought to myself, you know, I bet I can do that. And that's when I started this weekend retreat, which I'm having. I have about 2 times a year. Last year I had it 3 times a year. This year only twice. And the next one is in September. I put together this 2.5-day retreat, and I put my creative hat on, and I thought, okay, so what can I do to create the experience, the safe experience of connecting to that trauma child, understanding the root, the source of the codependency, the sadness, the loneliness, the shame. And how could I do this in a weekend among 10 other people, and then package it up nice and neatly so that by the end of the weekend, the people would leave with this rush of euphoria, excitement, and understanding of who they are and what they've become, and have this understanding, this yearning, this strong impulse to go back home to their therapist or find a therapist or something similar and solve this attachment, trauma, core shame, loneliness, addiction problem. And I did it. And I'm really proud to say I did it. I kept it really small. I kept it down to 10 people. I had another therapist with me, who is trained in my methods. I have the wonderful Carla Crawford, Self-Love Recovery's operational director, set the whole thing up. She's the smiley face behind everything that we do there. And food, it's at a hotel. Everything is done really well, because it's on the expensive side. So I thought, well, if people are going to spend the money on this, I'm going to make it as nice as possible. And every time for every of those retreats, I, just like everything else I do, I started to learn more and more about that process, that weekend process. How can I bring that out? How can I form this life-changing experience so that people can go home feeling not only like they understand themselves so much better, but ready to do the work? And I'm proud to say that we've done 5 of them, and it's, we're just kicking ass. And the guy that's doing them with me, David Renard, who has, 15 years experience in the field, he's just an awesome therapist. And he's pretty well adept in my own methods. It's a cool thing. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take any questions that you guys have about any of what I've been talking about. So now I'm going to see what you guys have to say. Someone asked me, could a narcissist be hypnotized and cured? Okay, those are 2 separate questions. Hypnosis does not cure codependency or self-love deficit disorder. It doesn't. And I never said that. what I said was, through my experience in being a hypnotist, and I have to quote that because I wasn't formally trained, I took some of those lessons and brought those into my own technique. Narcissists can't be cured from pathological narcissists because they don't think they have a problem. They blame everyone else, and they're very unlikely to be hypnotized because they don't like to lose control. Well, okay. When do you know therapy is working in cases of trauma? Marianne. If you're in psychotherapy and you're working on trauma and you're starting to feel more emotional control of your life, you're feeling less depressed, less sad, less lonely, you're less connected to the habits, the relationship habits you've had your whole life, like hanging on to a narcissist because you're afraid of being alone, your self-esteem gets higher. And, of course, you guys know I'm going to say this, and you feel this sense of self-abundance build up, then the trauma therapy is working. What is the difference between DID and a person who speaks from the wounded child, a traumatized child's voice? Thank you, Dina or Dinah. Sorry for not pronouncing it right. DID, which is a dissociative identity disorder, is a general diagnostic category for some very serious psychological problems. Self-love deficit disorder is not DID. Okay, let's get that straight. However, there is a similarity between dissociative identity disorder in that they were traumatized so badly they had to disassociate from the trauma. DID is a pervasive, larger problem that affects every part of their life. SLDD or codependency is something that affects your relationships, your romance, your romantic life. People with DID have many more problems trying to cope with life and struggle much more deeply than SLDs. But there are similarities in that they both experience trauma. The SLDs, the codependents, we talk about attachment trauma. The trauma of growing up being raised by a narcissistic parent and a codependent parent. DID could be rape, war. It could be something that is beyond attachment trauma. Very good question and complicated answer. But which of the SLDs, which type of SLDD would be attracted to a covert narcissist? Okay, so some of you guys know about my subcategories of self-love deficit disorder. I have the active SLD, the passive SLD, the anorexic SLD. What I've come to understand is the SLD who is most impaired, who has the deepest level of problems, tends to fall in love with the covert narcissist, the sociopath, or person with antisocial personality disorder, or the gaslighter. And of those three groups, it's the passive codependent. Because the active codependent, I mean, they're the ones that are fighting and saying, screw you, you can't control me, and they're throwing things, and maybe they're drinking too, and manipulating also, but still an SLD because they stay in the relationship despite, getting no love, respect, and care. The passive SLD gives up, feels weak and powerless. The active SLD feels powerless, but really isn't, and keeps wrestling with what I call the pig in the wrestling ring. That's my observe, don't absorb material. So that's a very good question. I believe the passive SLD is most culpable of falling in love with a covert narcissist, a sociopath who's going to gaslight them. What do I think about EMDR? EMDR is a research-based, proven therapy technique that works for trauma. I have a very strong opinion about it. By itself, it cannot solve self-love deficit disorder. It cannot solve attachment trauma. See, the problem with, or the challenge with attachment trauma is it's trauma that you can't remember because it happened so early in your life, versus if you were, if you were in a car accident, you were sexually abused, or something that you remembered. EMDR is a remarkable technique, but it is not meant to take the place of the therapy relationship, the talk therapy. So if someone has an EMDR trained therapist who is also trained in psychotherapy, then it is a fantastic way of solving the self-love deficit disorder problem, just as long as they understand it conceptually and theoretically. So EMDR is great, brain spotting is great. There's other techniques that it's interesting because EMDR, brain spotting, and my healing the trauma child, which, by the way, I have just a video based on that at Self-Love Recovery Institute. I think it's a 4-hour video. They all kind of access the disassociated memory, the repressed memory, but they do them differently. My technique, which I do in individual therapy and I do during my retreat, not only accesses it, but it puts it into context. It creates the story. It pulls the experience together in a way that helps the person not only integrate it into their conscious thinking, but helps them move forward in the life that has been filled with sadness, loneliness, and shame. Okay, what do we got? Okay, how do you know a therapist is good in understanding SLDD and narcissistic abuse? Here's the good and the bad news. Self-love deficit disorder is the whole theory, the whole explanation is something that I created. And I created it out of 30-something years of understanding all the other psychological theory. So it's not one of these theories like Freudian theory or this theory that you have to be trained to understand it. It's an amalgam. It combines so many other psychological theories and techniques into one way of looking at this codependency problem. But very few psychotherapists know about it. I'm trying to change that. My book has sold 65,000 copies. And that really hasn't even, my Human Magnet Syndrome book doesn't really talk about self-love deficit disorder. My videos do well, but there are very few psychotherapists who know self-love deficit disorder. So here's what I say to you guys. There is a video I have on YouTube, and don't quote me, but it's a video that is about what type of therapist to look for if you're looking for someone like me. It's a different title, but I basically answer that question. Well, you want self-love deficit disorder therapy. I'm not taking on new clients. So what to look for? Check that video out. Email Carla at help@selfloverecoveryinstitute.com if you can't find the video, and she'll tell you. So if you have a psychotherapist, and I promise you, this is not about me selling books or stuff, and you want help on your self-love deficit disorder, you have to tell them about it. You have to ask them to read the book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, and you have to ask them to buy the training, The Codependency Cure, because that puts it all together in a 5.5-hour, 6-hour package. It's intuitive stuff. I mean, you don't need an advanced. You don't need a college degree to understand this stuff. You don't need a high school degree to understand this stuff. But to be a therapist, if you're a good therapist already, and you're introduced to this stuff, then it kind of like opens up your mind. I did about 70 trainings, professional trainings, and I'll tell you, every single training I did, I had this room full of therapists in tears going, oh my God. By the way, a lot of therapists start off the field as codependents or SLDs. Heather wants me to talk about hippocampus amygdala. Oh, Heather, that's a little bit too complicated or specific, but I will say that attachment trauma itself that is disassociated, is stored in the part of our brain called the limbic system. It is separate from the part of the brain that has access to the rest of our memories. and that's throughout our cerebral cortex, the outer part of our brain. So through evolution, the brain figured out a way to take those memories and take them offline. And so they're in the limbic system. Within the limbic system is an almond-sized part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala stores the trauma memories, and that is where the trauma child lives. That is the part of the brain that I'm accessing when I am when people are at the retreat or I am doing my trauma-based therapy. I got to put my glasses on. The Warsaron, it seems more of a lived theoretical model than an observed model, or a mixture of both, unlike the Freudian model. I don't know what you mean. Whatever model you want to call it, it works. It works because it was developed through my own experience. It works because I've been practicing it on clients. It is a combination of psychoanalysis, which is Freudian, psychodynamic, self-psychology, object relations. Trust me, I don't want to bore you guys with the technical details, but my work can be broken down into specific psychological theory that I credit and am glad to credit. But this is not the time for me to get technical. I really wanted people to know about my trauma work. I wanted them to know about that the path to solving self-love deficit disorder is not to stop a habit. It's not to say no to narcissists. It's not to promise yourself to never do something or to do something different. It's to get to the root. And you guys know this. It's in my YouTube videos. It's in my longer seminar videos. And of course, I teach this at the retreat. You know, there is a self-love deficit disorder pyramid. The reason that self-love deficit disorder can't be cured, or codependency can't be cured, is everyone is working on it. And it's not the problem, it's the symptom. So if you think of a pyramid, at the very bottom of the pyramid is the cause, the foundation of SLDD, attachment trauma. The next level of the pyramid, from attachment trauma, comes core shame, feeling fundamentally broken, fundamentally bad, fundamentally disappointing. From core shame comes core pathological loneliness, is feeling so lonely and empty, and the only way that that you ever can feel good about yourself is you have to be with someone else. That pathological loneliness is bone aching. From pathological loneliness is SLDD addiction. You need that pain to go away, so you get into a relationship. The human magnet syndrome theory will tell you that the relationship you're going to get into will be the narcissist. And you stay in that relationship like the junkie stays on his drug, like the alcoholic stays on his alcohol. Because if you should quit your drug of choice, you'll go into withdrawal symptoms, and you'll experience the worst form of pathological loneliness. And then from the addiction level is codependency, or SLDD. So if you're going to solve this problem, you can't solve it at the top of the pyramid. You have to go down one level at a time. Okay, loneliness is scary. It is, and that is what drives people into these relationships with narcissists and keeps them there. It's like they're replicating their trauma child. In my retreat, I get people to understand through a set of psychological exercises and experiential exercises and trainings is that they carry this trauma child with them. The child that was hurt so badly, because of their narcissistic and codependent parent. And that loneliness, that shame that comes from a really, really bad childhood. And if you're going to solve it, you got to do the work. And sometimes, it's difficult. Yes, there's a lot of great YouTube channels. Growth After Abuse, Dana Morningstar is really good. There's a lot of good people out there. But stay away from the YouTubers and this might get me in trouble, that just talk about the narcissist being a bunch of jerks, idiots, and they go on and on and on about how horrible they are and how you have to stay away from them, and they talk on and on about what is bad about the narcissist. Okay, that might help you. I do the same thing. I'm guilty of it too. I got a lot of videos that will talk about mean old nasty narcissists. But the information about narcissists, the information about narcissistic abuse, the information about codependency, not self-love deficit disorder, codependency, it won't get you better, but it'll make you feel validated because someone is teaching you something. That is the beginning of recovery. But don't get stuck in these negative, blaming videos who want to demonize a narcissist. Yeah, they're nasty people, and I don't like them. But you don't get better by hating these people. You get better by disconnecting from them, getting out of the perpetual emotional fight with them, the disappointment, the expectation, the loneliness, and finding out why you don't love yourself. The people that have videos like that about self-love, self-care, self-growth, and there's many of them, those are the channels I recommend most. What does Lisa love? I don't know. Who's Lisa? Lisa who? I hope she loves herself. If it's so, let me see what we got here. Deborah says that I attracted these coverts, Prince Charmings, turned into devils. I couldn't understand each time. I thought it would be different, but it's always the same. Now I understand why. Well, you know what, Deborah? You understand what I figured out. It's the same person but different face. We are going to fall in love with this same narcissist. We are going to each SLD has a narcissist. Has a. If you're an alcoholic, some like wine, some like beer, some like whiskey. You're going to have your drug of choice, and you might fall for the covert narcissist. You might fall for the grandiose narcissist, but you're going to fall for these folks, and they're always going to feel like Prince Charming. My dad once said, what starts off as your soulmate always ends as your cellmate. The thing about the human magnet syndrome is it feels so incredibly good. You are not falling in love with a narcissist. You are falling in love with your dream woman, your dream man. It's all this fantasy. It's all distorted thinking and emotions. Please consider buying my book, not because I can make a few bucks on it, but because it'll change your life. It will help you understand who you are, and why you keep making the same mistake. I rewrote it completely from the 2013 version. So anyone who's read both of them will tell you, I'll tell you because I wrote it, that not only is it filled with new content, but it is the advancement of the human magnet syndrome material. The next book, The Codependency Cure, Recovering from Self-Love Deficit Disorder, I'm probably going to start writing it in 3 to 4 months, and which means it'll probably be done in 2 years. But until that, I have that material in full-length video form at selfloverecovery.com. I recommend the one on gaslighting. Actually, there's so many there, it's hard for me to recommend. I recommend the Codependency Cure, because that's where you should start, and it lays out what I do and how I do it. And then the other ones, read the descriptions and pick the one that's best for you. And lastly, of course, consider the retreat. It's a 2.5-day intensive weekend experiential retreat. It's a little bit redundant. And I promise you that it'll be worth the money, and I also know it's expensive. And not only will I take good care of you, Carla, David, and I limit it to only 10 people and only accept people that are SLDs or people who are ready for help. The last retreat, and Carla will vouch for me, we had 6 or maybe 7 people, I can't remember. I interviewed a total of around 17 people. The people that were not accepted needed help, and there was nothing wrong with them, but they didn't fit into what the event was supposed to do. And I protect it. I protect that container. I won't let anyone in that's not going to fit into what the group is meant to do and how it's supposed to do it. So with that, I want to say you guys are awesome. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. I would be nothing without you guys. Who would listen to all these ideas I have? My wife doesn't, and that's good. It probably saves our marriage. Yeah, therapists don't want to marry therapists. And Krell, she's a wonderful wife, and she's not a therapist. So guys, take care. Never stop believing that it's never too late to be the person you should have been. You all have a little child in there who might be stuck or is getting unstuck. Find him, find her, hold her hand, and make the both of you learn about self-love. Good night, and take care.